Indonesia's land acquisition law is reported to have a positive impact by speeding up the land acquisition process, as this law deals with revocation of land rights to serve public interests, puts time limits on each procedural phase, and ensures safeguards for land right holders. However, there are some reports that disbursement of the government's land procurement budget remains somewhat slow and is causing delay in some projects. What are your thoughts in general on how the land acquisition is going?
I think we have to be thankful and appreciative for the previous government's work in getting that legislation passed. And definitely it gives a better legal framework for land acquisition, for public infrastructure. It's probably as close to what in America one would call eminent domain type legislation. Now, the other thing I would add, however, is that, look, there's rules in the law, and then there's the action in the field, right? And my observation is that actually the very good thing that President Jokowi has brought is he himself previously has gone down to the fields, right, down to the villages, down to where the projects are, and engage with the people and talk to them. I think we need to keep in mind that we are, in many ways, still a surprisingly agrarian society. Unlike perhaps more urbanized societies, there's still a much closer emotional link between our people and their land. So yes, there's the law and the courts and the procedures, but there's also the social aspect, the human touch, the political reality and how to deal with it. And I think President Jokowi's more hands-on approach, humble approach, respectful approach has done as much to expedite land acquisition as a law, I would say.
Is that something you would recommend other politicians do as well? Go and speak directly to people?
Well, I do have to say, look, I worry that we bureaucrats, technocrats, political leaders in many ways are at risk of becoming so detached from the people that we're supposed to be serving, right? And I worry that around the world, we're breeding cynicism and disillusionment. And this cynicism and disillusionment in turn feeds populists, demagogues, and even, yes, radicals and terrorists, right? So I think in light of the seemingly more and more frequent attacks in Jakarta, Ankara, this week in Brussels, I do wonder whether it's timely for us to ask, as bureaucratic leaders, technocratic leaders, as political leaders, take a long and hard look in the mirror. Do we need to change our ways, right? Are we feeding the beast by being, not sufficiently in touch? In that sense, I think President Jokowi's extremely hands-on and extremely in touch approach potentially is a very intriguing example.
Sure, absolutely. We've got that problem in the United States of people probably rightly so thinking that Washington is very out of touch with mainstream America, and that's pretty much true.
Well, I can relate sometimes. Since I became minister 7 months ago, it does feel like you risk being in a bit of a bubble, right? Everywhere you go, you're surrounded by an entourage, and they rush you with protocols from airport to airport and meeting room to meeting room. And again, it's good sometimes to get out there and sometimes even on the sly, right? With no bodyguards, no protocols around, and then just kind of sneak in among the people and regain that feel for what's actually happening in the field.
You sound like you've done that then. You wore a hat and glasses or something?
The first time I read about it was probably 20 or more years ago. King Hussein of Jordan was famous for doing that. He would actually don a hat and a wig and a false beard and sunglasses and quietly, secretly plop himself down at a pub or a cafe and then listen in on people's conversation. But obviously, to the extent that we're doing it, we're following the lead of President Jokowi, who initially became famous for always being in the field, always being in the streets, being among the people, listening closely to what they're saying.
Sure, sure.